Welcome back, everybody. This is Trippy Cakes, and today's video is tips to dominate Alliance Conquest. Main thing to take away from Alliance Conquest is that this is a team-based game mode, so that's going to mean that you need synergy, communication, and overall you're going to kind of need a little bit of a plan. And when I say a little bit of, I mean like the higher you go, the more you're going to need. A lot of people have it mistaken as it's just some kind of free-for-all where zones lock, but that is not the case. But although it is a team-based game, you do have to start with yourself with your own improvements, like knowing team bonuses for your characters. This is so important. There's so many times where I'll come across an enemy on the other team, and I'll look at their setup, and I'm like, well, that's a good team, but that leadership just ruins everything. So look into these, know who your team ups are, know what works. You don't always have to go by these because there are some other alternative team setups that do work very well that don't give you a whole lot of bonuses. But, play around with it, like study it, research it a little bit, check it out. The next major important thing that I think of is your debuff leadership. Now, there's only probably about 10 or 11 of these. I put Malekith first because he is essentially the easiest one to get since he is free. You don't have to take him to tier 2. He just has that passive. Now, these are going to be, against your tier 3 Spider-Mans, your your Doctor Strange, time freezing, just crowd control and general debuffs, things that'll make your team weaker. And having these can turn a fight entirely to where, from your team not attacking to your team killing them before they can even do anything. It really just kind of varies depending on your characters and your skill level, as well as your builds and stuff like that. So do keep in mind that there aren't a whole lot of these. So, when you use them well. Don't waste them, because later down the road, there will be that team where you're like, man, I wish I had a debuff lead, and then you're getting wrecked. So I'm going to kind of briefly, or I try to do this as swift as possible with as much information. So for starters, my tips for starting off in phase 1, let's say you start off in the bottom right corner of the map. You're going to want to take as many of these zones with your tier 1s as possible. Once the computer starts having a tier 2 on their team, throw one of your weaker ones in there, because you don't want to get stuck up because your tier 1s take too much time to kill their tier 2. Now, basically, what I recommend is having your team race to get to the enemy home zones. Now, when you do that, say 7, 11, 1, and 3, you're going to want to stack those with some of your strongest. Not your absolute best, but some really strong characters. So that way they have to use ones either about the same strength or stronger to keep them out of there. If you are getting overwhelmed by both of these teams, sometimes it's best to do nothing for the first phase if you don't get ahead. If you don't get ahead, it is entirely okay to say, hey, you know what? Let's let them duke this out, because the second phase, you can take the entire map. And if they're really active in phase 1 and, half of phase 2, the chances are you're going to dominate in phase 2 and they're not going to get on for phase 3, which is the case with a lot of Alliance Conquest that I've ran through. I have done both high-end and low-end Alliance Conquest. So you'll know by the second day what phase they're active in. And with that being said, if both of them are extremely active in that first phase and they're not in the other ones that you notice, then go ahead and sit out that first phase, save your roster, clean the map, leave your strongest in their home zones. So that way, after a while, you kind of get them in a cycle of not being able to get as far as they could because they're trying to get out of the gate. Lock them in the gate is very, very crucial sometimes. Next up, you have to know your timers. Now, let's say you have zone 8. They already have capped zone 11. Take that to like 90% and wait. It's okay to wait on zones to actually lock them out. You do not absolutely have to. What you do when you do that is you're keeping them from making advancements. Let's say you do have 8 and you take 11 to 90. It's going to discourage them from going into zone 8, because at any minute you can just close it and take whatever else they put in there. So they're going to avoid that. That will push them north, going through 741, for example, and that will make them fight the enemy. Now, this is hypothetical, saying, both teams are active or all teams are active. Now, with doing that, playing these timers is going to keep them from completely sweeping the map. It's going to make them think about stuff. It's going to slow down the pace, which is going to turn this from like a 30 to 40 minute Alliance Conquest to an entire 2-hour conquest. So, like I said, just play smart with that. Know your phase, know your timers, and then know when you are outmatched in a round. If you're outmatched in a round, then there's no point in, losing your entire roster trying to do something that you can't. Wait for them to become inactive if you cannot fight them. And that is perfectly okay to do that. A lot of people will try to go balls to the walls and just get everything slammed. So Phase two, let's say you have a good setup and you know, you got most of the map and you left them in their home zones or whatever. So say you did that strategy where you took their home zones and you put some really strong characters in there, and then they went and they took it back. If you see Jeans, Deadpool, Stripes, whatever the case may be, those high-end, you know, top-tier characters in those home zones, leave them right there, because it's going to cost them crystals to take them out there and move them somewhere else, and I don't think anybody's going to want to do that for Alliance Conquest. Now, what that's going to do is, if say they left all their strong ones in 1, 3, 7, and 11, that means you're going to have 4, 5, 6, 9, and 12. Leave them in there so that way the next day they're missing out on all those characters and they're only getting about 4 points per round, while you were racking in about 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. You're getting about 18 while they're getting 4. And that makes a huge difference. 18 per round and they're getting 4 per round. And then after a while, if you can lock that down, something similar to that, to where you have a big lead the first 2 days, they're going to start fighting for second place. And from there, if they do take the entire map again, the next time that you are taking the entire map back, you shift them over to fight each other. So that way they're fighting over small territories while you're keeping the big stuff. It's a really great thing. And another thing is, one of the things that we kind of ran across this week when we were mopping the floor with them is they would wait until about, you know, the end of Alliance Conquest to retake their home zones. So with that being said, if you are in a good position, don't use your shield or anything like that. Just sit there and wait for them. And then once it gets to around that 14-minute mark or so, shield one of those home zones. And that way they're only taking one. There's a lot of different strategies that you can use for this, but these are just some tips to help you move it along and, you know, make better plays. But the most important thing, as I said, are those debuff leads and knowing those timers and knowing what you can take afterwards. I do thank you for watching, and I hope this helped at some extent. Please do like, subscribe, comment if you're new, and I'll check you guys next time.